The pounding in my head came first. It was a dull, constant throb behind my right eye, a tenant that had moved in after the car crash a year ago and never paid rent. The doctor said it would fade. It hadn't. Sometimes it was just a low hum, a background noise to my life. Other times, like today, it was a fist, clenching and unclenching inside my skull. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eye sockets, trying to push the pain back into whatever dark corner of my brain it had crawled out from. It didn't work. It never did. My apartment was a mess of boxes. I'd been putting off clearing out the storage unit for months. The landlord had sold the building, and everything had to go. Now my small living room was a canyon of cardboard, monuments to a life I barely remembered. The crash had taken more than just my peace of mind. It had scraped away chunks of my past like paint from a wall. I had photos of friends I didn't recognize, clothes that felt foreign on my skin, and a degree in a subject I couldn't recall studying. My name was Ethan. I was 28. That much, at least, I had been told. I sliced the packing tape on another box labeled desk stuff in a hurried scrawl that was supposedly my own handwriting. A wave of stale, papery air washed over me. Inside was a collection of junk. Dried up pens, a stapler, paper clips that had rusted into a single brown clump. I was about to heave the whole thing into a garbage bag when my fingers brushed against something hard and wooden at the bottom. I dug it out. It was a small, dark wood box, the kind for cigars maybe, with a simple brass latch. It felt heavy, solid. I didn't recognize it. I set it on the floor and flicked the latch open. The hinges gave a low groan. The contents were just as random as the other box. A smooth, gray Riverstone. A tarnished silver lighter that wouldn't spark. A folded concert ticket for a band I'd never heard of. And underneath it all, a piece of what looked like old parchment, folded into a neat square. It felt thick and stiff in my hands, more like leather than paper. I unfolded it. It was a map. Hand-drawn. The lines were black, a little unsteady, detailing streets and blocks of a part of the city I knew vaguely. Several locations were marked with a stark, red X. There was no key, no legend, just the lines and the crosses. I turned it over. The back was blank. I felt a flicker of annoyance. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, the sound swallowed by the quiet room. Probably some stupid game from college. A scavenger hunt or something. It meant nothing. I tossed it onto my coffee table, the corner of the stiff paper skidding against the wood surface. I went back to the boxes, the pounding in my head a steady, miserable drumbeat. That night, the pain got worse. It wasn't a fist anymore. It was a drill. A hot, sharp point boring its way through my temple. I writhed in my bed, the sheets twisting around my legs. Sleep wouldn't come. I was trapped in that half-conscious state where the world melts at the edges. The sound of my own breathing was loud, ragged. Then, images started to bleed through the pain. A hand. Not mine. Or maybe it was. It was smeared with something dark and wet. The hand held a pen, its nib scratching across a sheet of parchment. The scratching was loud, abrasive. I could smell copper, sharp and metallic. The hand moved with a grim purpose, drawing a line, then a diagonal slash across it, an X, another. The red of the X wasn't right. It was too bright, too vivid under a dim light. The hand trembled, but not from weakness. It felt like a tremor of excitement. I snapped awake. My whole body was slick with sweat. The sheets were a damp, tangled mess. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The room was dark, save for the pale rectangle of moonlight falling through the window. It cut across the living room, illuminating the coffee table. And the map. It sat there, looking different in the gloom. The lines seemed darker, the red crosses more pronounced. I sat up, my bare feet hitting the cold wood floor. The headache was still there, but it had receded, leaving behind a humming tension in my jaw. I walked over to the table. I picked up the map. The paper felt cool against my sweaty fingers. That's when I saw it. Tucked into the bottom right corner, almost lost in the shadows of a drawn intersection, was a line of text. The handwriting was small, spidery, and shaky. I had to hold it right under the moonlight to make it out. It was my handwriting. I knew it, the same way you know your own face in a mirror. 4 words. So I don't forget. My breath caught in my throat. The air in the room seemed to get thick, heavy. Forget what? The casual annoyance I'd felt earlier was gone. In its place, a cold seed of unease started to sprout in my gut. I stared at the words, my own handwriting an accusation from a stranger. I stood there for a long time, the map in my hand, the moonlight turning my skin a sickly gray. My eyes scanned the marks, landing on the first one at the top of the page. The scrawled letters next to it were barely legible. Pier X. I traced the red cross with my thumb, the paper rough beneath my skin. BZZZT. BZZZT. The vibration against the hardwood floor made me jump. My phone. On the end table, its screen glowed, breaking the darkness. An unknown number. My heart gave a hard lurch. It was late, past midnight. Nobody called me this late. I walked over, my feet silent on the floorboards. I stared at the glowing screen. My thumb hovered over the green icon. Maybe it was a wrong number. A drunk dial. I answered. Hello? Silence, then a sound. A wet, labored breath, in and out, close to the receiver. And behind it, another sound. The gentle, rhythmic slap of water against wood, the creak of a rope, the sounds of a pier at night. My blood ran cold, the hairs on my arms stood up. I could picture the dark water, the splintered pilings. Pier X. Who is this? I demanded, my voice a low croak. The only answer was another long, slow breath. Then, a click. They'd hung up. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. My hand was shaking. I lowered it, staring at the screen. As I did, it lit up again. A new message, from the same unknown number. I opened it. The message contained a single character. X. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a coincidence. They knew. They knew I had the map. They knew what I was looking at. Fucking hell, I whispered. Who the hell are you? The question was pointless, an empty sound in my empty apartment. I scrambled for the front door, my hand fumbling with the deadbolt. The metallic slide of the bolt was a small, useless comfort. I twisted the lock on the knob too, my back pressed against the door. I scanned the living room, the boxes, the shadows. The apartment no longer felt like my own. It felt like a cage. And something was outside. I backed away from the door, my movements slow, deliberate. I retreated into the bedroom, the only other room with a door I could close. I shut it gently, not making a sound, and turned the flimsy lock. I stood in the center of the room, my ears straining, trying to catch any noise over the frantic beating of my own heart. The building was quiet. The street outside was quiet. There was nothing, just the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My panic began to subside, replaced by a raw, jagged fear. I needed to see. I had to know if someone was out there. I crept to the window that faced the street, my body low. I stayed to the side of the frame, lifting just one slat of the blinds with my finger. Streetlights cast long, yellow pools on the empty sidewalk. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across the row of silent houses opposite mine. Then, nothing. No one was there. No one leaning against a car. No one hiding in the bushes. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe they were gone. Maybe it was just a sick phone call game. Scrape. The sound was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. It came from my right, from the other window, the one that looked out onto the narrow, dark alley between my building and the next. I dropped the blind and whipped my head around. My blood turned to ice. Scrape, scrape. It was a light, dry sound, like a fingernail being dragged slowly across the glass. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a signal. I stared at the window, at the dark pane reflecting the dim light of my room. I couldn't see anything through it, but something was out there, inches away. My breath hitched. I backed away from the window, my eyes locked on it. Then, a flicker of movement. A shadow, dark and lean, slid past the edge of the window frame. It was impossibly fast, a brief silhouette against the faint glow from the street beyond the alley, a human shape. Then, it was gone. My mind went blank. All thought vanished, replaced by pure animal instinct. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon. My old baseball bat. It was leaning in the corner where I'd left it after a hopeful trip to the batting cages months ago. I lunged for it, my hands closing around the worn wood grip. The weight was reassuring. I hefted it, planting my feet, my back to the wall between the two windows. I was a cornered animal. I waited, the bat held tight, my knuckles white. Nothing. The silence pressed in again, thick and heavy. A minute passed. Then, another. The only sound was the blood rushing in my ears. The shadow did not return. The scratching did not resume. They were gone. For now. My arms started to ache from the tension of holding the bat. Slowly, carefully, I lowered it. My whole body was trembling. A fine, uncontrollable shudder. I was slick with a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the earlier nightmare. I took a shaky step towards my cluttered desk, where I'd left the light on. The bat still in one hand, I reached for the map with the other. I needed to look at it again. I needed to understand. Under the direct glare of the desk lamp, the paper seemed to glow. My eyes went straight to the first mark. Pier X. And I saw it. The red of the cross wasn't flat and dry like ink. It had a sheen to it, a subtle gloss. It looked moist. My heart stuttered. Without thinking, I reached out my free hand, my index finger hovering over the mark. It looked like a fresh wound on the old paper. I touched it. The surface was cool and slightly sticky. I pulled my finger back. A bright red smear stained my fingertip. I brought it to my nose. The smell was faint, but unmistakable. Sharp. Metallic. The smell of copper. It wasn't ink. The stain on my fingertip was real. That was the part my mind kept snagging on. Hours had passed since the shadow at the window, since the metallic scent of the map. I hadn't moved from my desk chair. The baseball bat lay on the floor by my feet. Dawn was a weak, gray watercolor wash against the glass, but it brought no comfort. Sleep had been impossible, a distant country I had no visa for. Every creak of the building, every rattle of a passing truck, sent a jolt through my nervous system. They had been here, inches from me, and they had left a message on an old map drawn with what felt and smelled like blood. My blood. That was the thought that kept circling. They hand in the dream, drawing the map. The handwriting on the back. So I don't forget. This wasn't a game, it wasn't a threat from a stranger. It was a message from a part of myself I couldn't access, a part that knew what Pier X was. The phone call, the scraping on the window, that was someone else. Someone who knew about the map, someone who wanted me to follow it. The questions were a storm in my head, but one thing was solid, a single point of certainty in the chaos. I had to go. Standing still felt like waiting for a firing squad. Moving, at least, felt like a choice. The drive was an exercise in controlled tension. I kept my eyes on the road, but my gaze flickered to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Every car behind me was a potential tail. Every driver who glanced my way was an executioner. The city was waking up. People walking dogs, getting coffee. They lived in a world that made sense. I was driving toward a red X on a bloody map, my stomach a cold, hard knot. The bat signal from hell. The headache behind my eye pulsed in time with the engine's low hum. I found the pier easily. The part of the city it occupied was derelict, a graveyard of forgotten industry. Chain-link fences sagged. Their no trespassing signs bleached and peeling. I pulled my car into a gravel lot overgrown with weeds, parking behind the husk of a burned-out delivery truck. The place stank of stagnant salt water and decay. A thick, damp fog rolled in off the bay, swallowing the tops of the skeletal cranes that stood silent against the gray sky. It wasn't cold, but the air was heavy and wet, clinging to my skin, my clothes. I got out of the car, leaving the bat behind. Bringing it felt like an admission of what I expected to find here. For a moment, I considered just turning around, driving away, throwing the map into a sewer grate. But the image of the shadow at my window, the feel of the red smear on my fingertip, I couldn't run. I had to know. The pier itself was a long wooden tongue sticking out into the gray water. The planks under my feet were soft and spongy in places, groaning with each step. Gaps between them showed the dark, churning water below. The fog muffled all sound, creating a dome of quiet around me. The only noises were my own footsteps and the gentle, rhythmic slap of water against the rotting pilings. On either side of the main walkway, long, low warehouses squatted in the mist, their windows either boarded up or broken, like vacant eyes. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, a sense of deep exposure. Anyone could be in one of those buildings, watching me. I shoved my hands in my pockets, my right hand closing around the car keys, the metal biting into my palm. Just keep walking. A sudden explosion of white feathers and frantic flapping erupted from a piling right in front of me. A seagull, startled by my approach, shrieked and launched into the air. I stumbled back, my heart slamming into my ribs, a curse dying in my throat. My foot slipped on a wet patch of wood, and for a second, I thought I was going to fall. I caught my balance, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The bird circled once, its cry a mocking laugh, then vanished into the fog. Shit. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to take a slow breath, the damp air burning my lungs. You're just edgy, I told myself. Lack of sleep? I checked the map, which I'd folded into my back pocket. The X wasn't at the end of the pier but about halfway down, next to a smaller, secondary structure indicated by a simple rectangle. I scanned the area. To my left, set back from the main walkway, was a low, metal-sided building. A locker room, maybe? For the long-gone dock workers. That had to be it. I walked towards it, my boots crunching on the gravel and broken shells that littered the ground between the buildings. The warehouses now felt closer, their dark windows more ominous. The air here was stiller, trapped between the structures. The smell of rust was strong. I found the lockers. They were outside, under a corrugated tin awning, a long bank of them against the wall of the building. Most were agape, their doors hanging off twisted hinges, their insides hollowed out by time and weather. But near the end of the row, one was different. It was closed. A heavy-duty padlock, brown with rust, held it shut. This was the spot on the map. I reached out, my fingers tracing the flaking metal of the door. The cold seeped through my skin. As my thumb brushed against the lock, I heard it. Click! It was a small sound. Sharp. Metallic. It came from behind me, somewhere near the entrance to the alley between this building and the next. I spun around, my body tensing. There was nothing. Just the fog, the gray walls, the silent pier. But I heard it. I wasn't mistaken. A footstep on a loose stone. A lock being tested. Something. My unease sharpened into a hard-edged alertness. My eyes swept the ground. The dust and gravel lay thick and undisturbed, tracked here and there with my own boot prints. Then I saw it. Just at the edge of the shadows, almost hidden by an overturned barrel. A footprint. The tread was deep, military style. It was fresh. The edges were crisp, pressed into the damp ground. It wasn't mine. Someone was here, or had been, moments ago. My heart began a low, heavy drumming against my ribs. I turned back to the locker, my movements quick and jerky. All thoughts of being subtle were gone. I looked around, my eyes landing on a length of rebar lying amidst a pile of debris. It was heavy and caked with rust, but it would do. I wedged the end into the seam of the locker door, next to the padlock, and put my weight into it. The metal whined in protest. I grunted, my muscles straining. With a final, violent screech of tortured steel, the latch tore free from the door. It swung open with a groan. The inside smelled of dust and old oil. It was empty. Except for one thing. Sitting on the metal shelf in the middle. A small, handheld cassette recorder. The plastic casing was gray and scuffed. It looked ancient. A relic from a different time. Why? Why this? My curiosity overrode my fear. I picked it up. It felt light, cheap. With a trembling finger, I pressed the play button. Hissing filled the air, the sound of blank tape. Then, a voice. It was tinny and distant, distorted by the small speaker, but undeniably female. She was crying. Please, don't. I don't know anything, I swear. The voice was thin with terror, pleading. Please. It was cut off. Abruptly, not by a stop in a recording, but by a sound, a massive, resonant teeth-thud, like a car door being slammed shut but heavier. A trunk. It was followed by a fraction of a second of silence, and then a laugh. It was a low, guttural chuckle, warped by the tape. And it was familiar. My blood ran cold. The sound scraped at the edges of my missing memory, a key turning in a lock I couldn't find. It was a sound of pure, joyous cruelty. I knew that laugh. I didn't know how, but I knew it. Slam. The sound was deafening, a physical blow that made me flinch. It wasn't on the tape. It was real. It came from behind me. The main door to the massive warehouse across the narrow walkway had slammed shut. It had been wide open a moment ago. Now it was closed, plunging the alley into a deep, oppressive gloom. The fog seemed to drain the world of all light that remained. He's here. The thought wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Trapped. I dropped the recorder, the plastic clattering on the gravel. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the bank of lockers, my eyes wide, trying to pierce the shadows. Nothing moved. I had to get out, not back the way I came, toward the closed door. The other way. Toward the pier. I started to back away, my feet clumsy on the uneven ground. I didn't dare turn my back. I kept my eyes fixed on the warehouse, on the alley entrance. My breath hitched in my chest. I took another step back, my heel catching on something. I fell hard, my hands scraping against the ground. Pain shot up my wrist. I pushed myself up, crab walking backward, a low sound of fear escaping my lips. I reached the corner of the locker building and risked a glance back toward the main pier walkway. It was my only escape. I pushed myself to my feet and ran. My lungs burned. My feet pounded on the wooden planks. The fog was a blindfold. I couldn't see the end of the pier. I couldn't see my car. I needed cover. I veered to my right, spotting a stack of old wooden shipping crates, their wood dark with rot. I squeezed myself into the gap between the crates and the wall of another warehouse, my back pressed against the rough, splintered wood. I crouched, making myself small, trying to control my breathing. Listening. The world was silent again. The only sound was the blood roaring in my ears. Did he see me? Was he still back there? Or was he coming? Then I heard it. A footstep. On the wood of the pier. It was slow. Measured. The sound of someone who was in no hurry. Thump. A pause. Thump. He was searching. Hunting. The steps grew closer, the sound echoing in the damp air. He was walking down the center of the pier. He was going to pass right by my hiding spot. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my face against my knees. Don't find me. Please, don't find me. The footsteps stopped. They stopped right next to the crates. I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. The silence stretched, thin and tight. He knew I was here. This was the game. I could smell the rot from the crates, the salt from the air. I waited for a hand to grab my shoulder, for a voice to whisper in my ear. There was a soft scraping sound from above me. I risked opening my eyes, tilting my head up. A hand. It appeared over the top edge of the crate I was hiding behind. It was pale. The fingers were long and thin. They curled slowly over the edge of the wood, just a few feet from my face. They weren't moving fast, they were exploratory, feeling their way. The nails were clean. The hand was patient. It was going to rest there for a moment. And then it was going to find me. I was paralyzed. A block of ice, watching those fingers descend into my world. WHOO. A long, blasting sound ripped through the fog. A horn. A ship out in the bay. It was loud, close and unexpected. The hand flinched. Violently, it snapped back, disappearing from view. A muffled curse. Then, the sound of running, heavy, frantic footsteps on the wooden pier, running away, back towards the shore. The sound faded quickly, swallowed by the fog. He was gone. I didn't move. I stayed crouched in the dark, stinking space for what felt like an hour, listening. The ship's horn blew again, farther away this time. There were no more footsteps. Just the water lapping against the wood. Finally, trembling violently, I crawled out from behind the crates. I stumbled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran, my legs pumping, my lungs on fire, until I reached the gravel lot. My car was there, untouched. I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. The door clicked open. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat there, leaning my forehead against the steering wheel, panting. Sweat slicked my body. I had escaped. I was alive. After a few minutes, my heartbeat began to slow. The adrenaline started to recede, leaving a hollow, trembling exhaustion in its wake. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pushed myself upright. I needed to get out of there. I put the key in the ignition, and my eyes automatically flicked to the rearview mirror as I did. My breath caught in my throat. Something was on the back seat, something that hadn't been there before. It was a small, perfect lock of long, dark brown hair. It was tied neatly with a single, bright red ribbon. It lay in the center of the seat, a deliberate offering. A trophy. He had been in my car. While I was on the pier, he had been right here. He could have waited. He could have been sitting here when I got back. He didn't want me dead. Not yet. This was a message. And lying there on the seat, a souvenir from a dead woman. It said more than any voice ever could. I know where you live. I can get to you anytime. And the game has just begun. The engine whined as I pushed the car past 60 on the empty city streets. I didn't care. The small, dark knot of hair on the back seat pulsed in my rearview mirror, a cancerous mole on the clean fabric. Every red light was an agony. A stop sign felt like a death sentence. He could be in any of the cars. He could be waiting at any intersection. The drive home was a blur of smeared lights and a low, continuous stream of curses spilling from my mouth. I slammed the car into its parking spot, the tires screaming against the concrete. I didn't look back. I didn't look at the back seat. I sprinted from the car to the building's main door, fumbling for my keys, the metal biting into my sweaty palm. The lobby was empty, lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube. The sound of my own footsteps echoed off the tile, too loud. He was behind me. He was in the elevator. He was on the stairs. He was already in my apartment. I chose the stairs, taking them two at a time, my lungs burning, the coppery taste of fear in my mouth. My apartment door. Floor 4. The key scratched against the lock. I turned it twice. The deadbolt shot home. A solid sound. I leaned my full weight against the door, my forehead pressed to the cool wood, and slid the chain into its track. The click was tiny, insufficient. My breath came in ragged bursts. I was inside. I was safe. A lie. He had been in my car. This door was nothing. My whole body trembled with a desperate, chemical energy. Sleep was not an option. Waiting was not an option. In the morning, I would go to the police. I would give them the map. I would tell them about the pier, the tape, the hand, the lock of hair. I would sound like a lunatic. They would not believe me. But it was a plan. It was a solid thing in the chaos. For tonight, I just had to survive until the sun came up. To do that, I needed to stay awake. I moved through the small apartment, my feet silent on the cheap carpet. I checked the window locks again. All secure. I drew the blinds tight, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the thin lines of city light that bled through the edges. Coffee. I needed coffee. In the kitchen, my hands shook as I scooped grounds into the filter. The smell was rich and dark, a scent from a normal world I no longer lived in. I filled the machine with water and flipped the switch. The gurgle and hiss of the brewer was a comfort. While I waited, I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the 9 and the 1, but I stopped. What would I say? Someone left a lock of hair in my car while I was visiting a haunted pier from a map drawn in blood? I closed the phone and just scrolled through old photos. Me and some friends at a ball game. A picture of a beach at sunset. Things that felt like they happened to another person 100 years ago. My gaze drifted to the row of hooks by the door. My jacket. The dog's old leash from before he died. An empty hook. The one where my car keys always went. They weren't there. A small, cold spike went through me. I patted my pockets. My right pocket. There they were, the metal cool against my thigh. Of course, I must have shoved them in my pocket when I ran from the car. I never did that. But tonight was not a normal night. I dismissed it. The coffee machine gave a final sigh. I poured the black liquid into a mug. The coffee was hot, bitter. It burned my tongue. I carried it into the bedroom. My plan was to sit on the floor, my back to the wall, and just wait for morning. I flicked on the lamp by the bed, and then I saw it. My body went completely still. The mug in my hand felt heavy, distant. On my pillow, placed perfectly in the center of the depression where my head would have been, was a photograph. A single Polaroid. The white border was stark against the dark gray of the pillowcase. It hadn't been there when I left. I knew it. I knew it with a certainty that made the hair on my arms stand up. I put the mug down on the nightstand. My hand was steady now, unnaturally so. I reached out and picked up the picture. It was me. I was in the photo, lying in this very bed, fast asleep. The blanket was pulled up to my chest. My mouth was slightly open. My face was slack, peaceful. It looked like it had been taken last night, before any of this began. But it wasn't the image of me that made my blood turn to ice water. It was the angle. The picture was taken from directly above me, high up, near the ceiling, looking straight down, as if the person holding the camera had been floating there, or clinging to the ceiling like an insect. No! A small sound escaped my lips. No, no, no. It couldn't be. My ceiling was flat, plaster, with no attic, no crawl space. There was nowhere to hide. Panic took hold. It was a physical thing. A claw that seized my insides. He was here. He had been here. While I slept, he had stood over me, watching me. I dropped the photo and tore the room apart. I ripped the sheets and blanket off the bed. Nothing. I looked underneath. Nothing. The closet. I threw the door open, shoving clothes aside, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Suits, old shirts, a box of papers. I got on my hands and knees, peering into the dark corners, my fingers searching for anything that didn't belong. Bills. The sound from the living room was so loud it was like a physical blow. A brutal, static roar. The television. It had turned on by itself, at full volume. I scrambled out of the closet, my heart hammering against my ribs. I crept to the bedroom doorway, my body low, and peered out. The living room was bathed in the flickering, monochrome light of the screen. It showed only snow, a churning sea of black and white pixels. I took a step into the room. The sound was deafening, a solid wall of noise. And then, underneath it, something else. A voice. It was woven into the fabric of the static, a low, electronic whisper. It was distorted, but it was there. It was repeating a name. Tessa C. Tessa C. The name snagged on something in my mind. A broken hook in the dark. It felt familiar. The shape of it on my tongue felt known. But the memory it belonged to was gone, locked behind a door I couldn't find. Tessa C. I had to make it stop. I lunged for the remote on the coffee table. I jammed my thumb down on the power button. Nothing. The static roared on. The voice continued its rhythmic chant. I scrambled behind the entertainment center, my fingers finding the thick power cord. I yanked it from the wall socket. The screen stayed on. The voice did not stop. Tessa C. Tessa C. It wasn't using electricity. The sound was coming from the speakers, but the machine was dead. It was impossible. This was not happening. My mind was coming apart. Rage, pure and clean, cut through the fear. It was a clarifying fire. He was in my head. He was doing this to me. I wasn't going to let him. My eyes locked on the baseball bat, still lying on the floor by the door from this morning. I snatched it up. The wood felt good in my hands. Solid. Real. I walked back to the television. The bat held high. The static howled. The voice whispered. I swung. The sound of the screen imploding was satisfyingly final. A sharp crack followed by the tinkle of glass hitting the floor. The static cut out instantly. The whispering voice vanished. Silence. The room was dark again, save for the weak light from the street. I stood there, breathing heavily, my knuckles white on the handle of the bat. I looked at the shattered screen, the spiderweb of cracks radiating from the point of impact. I had done it. I had broken it. I had won. A small measure of control returned. I let the bat hang by my side. I had to think. I had to get out of here. Not wait for morning. Now. I would go to an all-night diner. Sit in a brightly lit booth until the sun came up. I turned from the dead television. I looked toward the front door. And my heart stopped. It didn't sink. It didn't leap. It just stopped, for one solid second. The chain I had so carefully slid into place was hanging loose. The deadbolt I had turned twice was unlocked. And the door itself was open. Just a crack. A dark, vertical slice of the hallway outside, canted at an odd angle in the main lock, glinting in the faint light from the hall, was my chumchia koa. My car keys, the ones that had been in my pocket. My mind refused to process it. It was a contradiction, a glitch in reality. He hadn't picked the lock. He hadn't broken in. The keys were in the door. From the inside, the door was open. As if he hadn't broken in. As if he had just let himself out. My eyes moved slowly, numbly, from the keys down to the doorknob. And there, smeared across the cold brass, was a handprint. It was formed from wet, dark grime. I could see the distinct whorls of the palm, the definite shape of fingers. It was the same thick, dark mud from the pier. The same mud that was caked on the cuffs of my own jeans. The pieces clicked into place, not with a thought, but with a cold, physical certainty that flooded my veins. The missing keys from the hook. The convenient explanation I had given myself. The open door. It wasn't him. It had never been him. Somehow, some way, I had opened the door for him. I had put the keys in the lock and opened the door. I had let him out. Or, a more terrible idea began to form, a sliver of ice in my gut. Maybe I had just come back in. My hand closed around the cool, smooth wood of the baseball bat on the passenger seat. The other hand held the map. Its bloody lines seemed to glow under the passing streetlights. I didn't drive toward the police station. The thought was a distant foolishness from another person's life. Going to them with this story, with the dead television and the open door, was a waste of breath. There was only one path forward. It was drawn on the paper next to me. The second X was in a part of town where the streetlights had given up. The buildings were low and slumped, their windows dark like empty eye sockets. My car's engine sounded too loud here, an intruder. I found the place. The Sunset Motel. Its sign was missing a T, reading Sunset Motel in sickly yellow neon that fizzed and popped. I parked across the street, watching it for a long count. The office light was on. No one went in. No one came out. I took the keys from the ignition and got out. The air smelled of wet asphalt and decay. I left the bat. It was too much. Too obvious. I reached into my jacket pocket, and my fingers found the small fruit knife from my kitchen block. Its plastic handle was flimsy, the blade barely 3 inches long. It wasn't a weapon. It was a prayer. I crossed the street, my shoes crunching on unseen gravel. The glass door to the office protested with a long squeal. A man sat behind the counter, hunched over a small television showing a grainy basketball game. He had greasy hair and a yellowing white t-shirt that had lost its shape. He didn't look up. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. "I need a room," I said. My voice was a dry rasp. He moved his head just enough to see me with one eye. He grunted. $40, cash, no tell motel, no questions asked. I put 2 20s on the counter. They were wrinkled from my pocket. He scooped them up without looking at them and dropped a key onto the scarred wood. The key was attached to a large, diamond-shaped piece of red plastic. The number 204 was written on it in black marker. "Room 204, he mumbled, his eyes already back on the game. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the right number. The map hadn't lied. I had to ask. I had to know. "Has a woman named Tessa C. ever stayed here?" The clerk finally turned his full head to look at me. His expression was one of complete indifference. It was worse than anger. He shrugged, a slow roll of his shoulders. "Man, I don't remember the face of the guy who was in here 5 minutes ago. People come, people go. Nobody remembers names here." He gestured with his chin toward the door. "Second floor. Stairs are on the outside." I took the key. Its plastic edges were sharp in my palm. The walk up the concrete stairs was loud. Each step was an announcement. I was here. I was coming. The railing was cold and damp under my hand. The second floor walkway overlooked the empty parking lot. The doors were painted appealing, faded blue. I found 204. I put the key in the lock. It was stiff. I had to jiggle it before the bolt turned with a heavy clunk. I pushed the door open and was hit by the smell. It was the office smell, but 100 times stronger. Smoke and mold and something else. Something sour and metallic. My hand tightened on the knife in my pocket. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The click of the latch was deafening. The room was a box. A bed with a thin brown bedspread. A small round table with one chair. A dresser with missing knobs. The carpet had a large, dark stain near the bed. I didn't want to know what it was. I moved through the space, my feet silent on the worn fibers. I was looking for something. I didn't know what. Another note. Another photograph. Another piece of a person. The drawers of the dresser were empty except for dust, and a single dead cockroach. Then I saw the bathroom door slightly ajar. A thin sliver of white light came from inside. I pushed it open. It was a tiny space with a yellowed shower stall, a toilet, and a small sink with a large square mirror above it. The mirror was the strangest thing. It was covered in a thick layer of fog, as if someone had just taken a long, hot shower. But the air was cold. My breath made a plume in front of my face. I stepped closer, my reflection a blurry shadow in the gray mist. I could feel a low hum, a vibration in the floor. My eyes scanned the fogged surface. It was uniform, a perfect canvas of condensation. Then I breathed out. My warm breath hit the cold glass. And the fog changed. As my breath washed over the surface, letters appeared. They weren't formed by my breath wiping the fog away. They were revealed within it, dark lines against the gray, as if an invisible finger had just finished scrawling them. The words were simple. Stark. You killed her. A jolt went through me, so violent it felt like a shock from a live wire. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the bath mat. I fell against the bathroom door. It slammed shut with a wooden boom that echoed in the small space. The ajar lock clicked into place. Then, the light bulb above the mirror flickered. Once, twice, it went out. Total darkness. A darkness so complete it felt like a weight pressing on my eyes. I was trapped. I scrambled back to my feet, my hands fumbling against the flat surface of the door, searching for the knob. My fingers found the cold, round metal. I turned it. It didn't budge. Locked. I froze, I held my breath. And I heard it. From the other side of the door. In the main room. Click. The sound of the key turning in the lock of the room's main door. My key was in my pocket. Someone else had a key. Then, footsteps. Heavy. Slow. The deliberate tread of a man wearing work boots. The floorboards of the cheap motel room creaked under his weight. One step. A pause. Another step. He was in the room. He was in there with me, separated only by a thin, flimsy wooden door. I flattened myself against the wall next to the toilet, as far from the door as I could get. My hand was out of my pocket now, gripping the small fruit knife. The plastic handle was slippery with sweat. I tried to control my breathing, to make it silent, but the air sawed in and out of my lungs, a harsh, ragged sound. I heard the scrape of a drawer being pulled open, a soft thud as it was closed. Then another. He was searching, methodically. He was looking for something, or someone. He was moving across the room now, his heavy steps coming closer to the bathroom. Closer. He stopped right outside the door. I could hear the faint whisper of his clothes shifting. I held the knife up in front of me, my knuckles white. The tip of the blade trembled. Silence. The silence stretched. It was worse than the footsteps. In the silence I could hear the frantic drumming of my own heart. I could feel the blood pulsing in my ears. Boom. The door shuddered, hit by a massive force from the other side. The wood splintered near the lock. I cried out, a small, choked sound. Boom. This time a crack appeared, a jagged line of blackness running from the doorknob up. He was going to break it down. He was coming in. Boom. The lock assembly tore free from the frame. The door flew open, slamming against the bathroom wall. A figure stood silhouetted in the dim light from the motel parking lot that now streamed into the main room. A man dressed in a dark hooded sweatshirt and jeans. His face was covered by a black ski mask. Only his eyes were visible, and they were fixed on me. He didn't speak. He didn't hesitate. He launched himself across the small space. I had no time to think. I reacted. I met his charge, shoving the knife forward. He was bigger, stronger. His weight crashed into me, slamming my back into the tiled wall of the shower stall. The impact knocked the wind out of me. His hands were on me, one grabbing my wrist, squeezing with incredible force, trying to get the knife. The other hand balled into a fist and smashed into my ribs. Pain exploded in my side, sharp and blinding. I gasped, tasting metal. He hit me again in the same spot. My knees buckled. We were a tangle of limbs, a furious grunting struggle in the dark. His masked face was inches from mine. I could smell his breath, stale and hot. His grip on my knife wrist was like a vice. He twisted. I felt the bones in my wrist grind together, A scream tore from my throat. I was going to lose the knife. It was the only thing between me and him. With my free hand, I clawed at his mask, my fingers searching for his eyes. He jerked his head back. For a split second, his grip on my wrist loosened. It was enough. I wasn't thinking about defense. I wasn't thinking about escape. All thought was gone, replaced by a pure, clean fire. I drove my weight forward, freeing my arm from his grasp and shoving the knife with all my strength into the soft part of his shoulder, just below the collarbone. The blade sank in. I felt it happen. The slide through fabric, the thick resistance of flesh and muscle, and then the hard stop as it hit bone. He made a sound. Not a yell of pain, but a deep, guttural roar of pure animal rage. He let go of me and staggered back, his left hand coming up to clutch at his shoulder, where the flimsy plastic handle of my knife now stuck out at an odd angle. He looked down at it, then back at me. His eyes, visible through the mask, were blazing. He kicked out, a vicious, powerful strike that caught me in the chest. I went down hard, my head cracking against the floor. The world swam in a sea of black spots. I saw him loom over me for a second, a dark giant. Then he turned, stumbled out of the bathroom, and ran. I heard his heavy footsteps pounding down the walkway outside, then down the concrete stairs, fading into the night. I lay on the cold, grimy floor of the bathroom, gasping for air. Every breath sent a fresh wave of fire through my ribs. Blood, not mine, was smeared on the back of my right hand, dark and sticky in the dim light. I pushed myself up into a sitting position, my body trembling. I did it. He was gone. I had defended myself. I had survived. My eyes fell to my hands. The right one was covered in his blood. The left was clean. I stared at my right hand, at the way my fingers were curled, as if still holding the weapon, and a new feeling rose up, colder and sharper than the pain in my side. The way I had held the knife, the way I had shoved it into him. It hadn't been a wild, panicked jab. There was no hesitation. The motion had been smooth, economical. It was a practiced, efficient movement, a short, brutal thrust, designed to do the most damage in the smallest amount of time. The angle, the depth, the twist of the wrist at the end. It wasn't the clumsy act of a terrified man. It was the work of a professional. My hand felt like a stranger's, an alien thing attached to my arm. It felt like it had done this before. 100 times before. 1,000. The drive home was a blur of smeared headlights, and the steady, insistent throb in my ribs. A deep, anchoring pain with every breath, every turn of the wheel. My right hand rested on my thigh, palm up. The blood had dried to a stiff, dark crust that flaked when I flexed my fingers. His blood. The wheel was slick under my left hand. I focused on the mechanics of it. Gas, brake, turn. Simple actions. The car was an obedient machine. It didn't ask questions. It didn't know the smooth, practiced economy of the movement I had made in that bathroom. It didn't know the feeling of a blade sinking into meat and stopping against bone. I did. That knowledge was a block of ice in my gut. It was a foreign object, a piece of someone else's life that had been surgically implanted into mine. I had acted, I had survived. But the man who had driven that knife was not the man who was now parking the car in front of his own dark house. I killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was heavy, thick with the memory of sound. The roar of rage from a masked man, the splintering of a wooden door, the wet, sliding sound of the knife. I sat there for a long time, my keys still in the ignition. The house looked wrong. The windows were too dark. The porch light I always left on was out. Had I forgotten? My mind snagged on the detail. I couldn't remember turning it off this morning. I couldn't remember anything about this morning. My body moved on its own. Out of the car. The key in the front door lock. The familiar metallic tumble of the pins. The door swung inward on a pocket of cold, still air. It smelled like my house, like dust and old paper, and the faintest trace of the cleaner I used last week. It smelled sane. I closed the door and slid the deadbolt. The sound was a loud, final chunk of metal into metal. I was safe. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my eyes closed. The map was still in my jacket pocket, a stiff square of paper pressing against my chest. It had to end. This journey, this scavenger hunt laid out by a madman. I couldn't go to the third X. I wouldn't. The thought of getting back in the car, of following those red lines to another dark place, another confrontation, turned my stomach. I would burn it. I would destroy the map, and this would all stop. It had to. I walked through the dark living room, my steps sure in the familiar space. I didn't turn on a light. I went straight to the liquor cabinet, my fingers finding the cut glass decanter of whiskey. I pulled out a heavy tumbler. The clink of glass on glass was the only sound. I poured. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from a deep, cellular exhaustion. The amber liquid sloshed, a small wave in a glass sea. I drank it down in one long, burning swallow. The heat clawed its way down my throat, a welcome fire against the ice in my belly. I set the empty glass down and pulled the map from my pocket. I smoothed it out on the polished surface of the bar. Even in the gloom, the red lines seemed to possess their own light. A network of veins on a pale skin of paper. Room 204. Tessa C. A dead television. A man with a knife in his shoulder. This was the work of the map. It was a poison seed, and I was letting it grow inside me. I gripped the edge of the paper. My plan was simple. I would take it to the kitchen sink, tear it into 100 tiny pieces, douse them with water until they were a worthless pulp, and stuff them down the garbage disposal. Gone. I was standing in the kitchen. The whiskey glass was in my hand, half full again. The room was cold. The back of my neck prickled. I had no memory of walking from the living room. I didn't remember pouring a second drink. One moment I was staring at the map on the bar, the next I was here, feet planted on the cool linoleum, the glass in my fist. A gap. A slice of time had been neatly excised. My breath hitched. Just tired. The fight, the adrenaline, it messes you up. That was the rational thought. The one that came next was not. The man in the mask didn't do this. He wasn't here. This was something else. This was inside. I put the glass down on the counter with a loud crack. I needed to see my face. I needed to see if I was still me. The short hallway to the bathroom was a tunnel. My feet sounded too loud on the hardwood. I flicked the switch. The vanity lights blazed, painfully bright. I squinted, stepping up to the sink. The mirror was large, clean. My face stared back. Pale. The stubble on my jaw was dark. There were new lines around my eyes, etched there by the last few hours. My expression was one of shock, of a deep and profound confusion. It was my face. It was the face of a man who was losing control. I turned on the cold tap, the water splashing into the white basin. I cupped my hands, rinsing the dry blood from my right hand, watching the dark flakes swirl and disappear down the drain. I scrubbed until the skin was raw. Then I splashed the cold water on my face. It was a shock to the system, a jolt of cold reality. I gasped, droplets clinging to my eyelashes. I looked up again, into the mirror, and my reflection smiled. It wasn't my smile. It was a slow, predatory peeling back of the lips, a smirk of absolute confidence, of cruel amusement. The eyes in the reflection weren't wide with fear. They were narrowed, glinting with a secret knowledge, a terrible and ancient humor. They looked at me, the real me, the one standing in front of the glass, with a mixture of pity and contempt, like a man looking at a bug he was about to crush. I made a sound, a choked gasp. I slammed my eyes shut, then snapped them open again. The face in the mirror was mine again. The expression was one of pure horror. The smirk was gone, but it had been there. I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes. It was not a trick of the light. It was not my imagination. A pain flared behind my right eye. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a sharp, piercing agony, as if an ice pick had been hammered into my skull. My vision blurred at the edges, the bright bathroom lights turning into swimming halos. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my head. The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. I fell to my knees, a cry of pain caught in my throat. The world dissolved into a gray, painful fog. Darkness swallowed the edges. I was falling, not onto the floor, but into a black, silent void inside my own head. Time broke. When I came to, I was standing. My knees were stiff, my head pounding with a dull, residual throb. I was on my feet, facing the mirror. My hand was at my side. I didn't remember getting up. The silence in the house was absolute. My eyes focused on the mirror. Something was different. The glass was smeared. There were red marks on it. Words, written in something greasy, waxy. In a messy, looping scrawl, the letters spelled out a sentence. I'm coming home. The red was vivid against the silvered glass. My gaze dropped to my left hand. I opened my palm. Nestled in it was a tube of lipstick. Dark red. The cap was off. I had never seen it before in my life. It wasn't mine. There was no woman in my life. Not now. Not for a long time. Where did it come from? The question was a scream in my mind, but no sound came out. The lipstick dropped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the tile. This wasn't the man in the mask leaving clues. This wasn't some outside force. The lipstick was in my hand. The message was from the smirking man in the mirror. It wasn't a threat from an enemy, it was a promise. From me, to me. He was coming home, he was coming back. A wave of fury, hot and clean, washed away the fear. It was a rage born of violation. He was in my head. He was in my house. He was looking out of my eyes. No, I whispered. The word was a tear in the silence. No. I lunged forward. I didn't use a weapon. I didn't need one. My fist was already balled, a tight knot of bone and flesh. I threw it with all my strength, not at the mirror, but at the face within it. At the smug, knowing smirk that I could still see behind the red letters. The impact was a detonation of sound. The glass exploded. A web of cracks erupted from my knuckles, and a shower of silvered shards rained into the sink. Pain, sharp and immediate, lanced up my arm. But it was distant. It didn't matter. The face was still there, fractured into 100 different pieces. 100 different smirking eyes looking back at me. I hit it again. My bare knuckles punched through the fractured glass, into the space behind it. More glass fell. A large piece sliced open the back of my hand. I felt the warm, wet rush of my own blood. I pulled my hand back and drove my other fist forward. I roared, a raw, animal sound of defiance. I was trying to kill it. I was trying to kill him, punching, grabbing, tearing at the jagged edges of the broken mirror, ripping them from the wall, not stopping until my hands were shredded and nothing remained but a dark, empty square on the drywall. Then, it was over. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving. My breath rasped in my throat. The fury drained away, leaving behind a hollow ache. I collapsed, my back sliding down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the glittering debris of my reflection. My hands were a mess. Blood dripped from a dozen cuts, pooling on the white tile between my knees. My breathing slowly returned to normal. I stared at the wall where the mirror had been. There was a recess, a hollow space behind where the medicine cabinet had been set into the drywall. It was dark inside. Dust motes danced in the light from the vanity bulbs. And there, in the back of the dark cavity, something was wedged into the insulation. A small, black object. It had been carefully placed, hidden from view. My body moved slowly, stiffly. I pushed myself up onto my knees, ignoring the sting of the tiny glass shards. I reached my bloody hand into the hole. My fingers were clumsy, numb. They brushed against the object. It was hard plastic. I curled my fingers around it and pulled it free. I brought it out into the light. It was small, fitting in the palm of my hand. A simple, black USB flash drive. There were no markings on it, no labels, just a sterile piece of black plastic and metal. A container for information. A key. I stared at it, the blood from my hand dripping onto its surface. A new kind of cold seeped into me, a cold that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with certainty. The map had led me to the motel. The motel had led me back to myself. And myself, he had left me this. One final stop on the journey home. I sat on the tile, a circle of glittering ruin around me. The air tasted of dust and copper. My own blood. It dripped from my knuckles, thick and slow, making dark constellations on the white floor. The pain was a low, steady hum, a current running from my torn flesh up my arm. I ignored it. My eyes were fixed on the black plastic shape in my hand. The USB drive. It was slick with my blood. My body moved without a command. I planted a palm on the floor, pushing myself up. A piece of glass, sharp as a needle, drove into my skin. I didn't flinch. I used the wall to stand, my back scraping against the drywall. My legs were heavy things, unconnected to me. I walked out of the bathroom, leaving a single, bloody footprint on the threshold. The house was dark. The only light came from the vanity bulbs I'd left on, spilling a pale yellow rectangle into the hallway. I didn't reach for a light switch. My laptop was on the small desk in the living room, a closed black slab. That was the destination. I found the first aid kit under the kitchen sink. My fingers, stiff and clumsy, struggled with the plastic clasps. I pulled out antiseptic wipes. The sting was a sharp, clean fire that made my vision swim. I wrapped my hands in gauze, winding it tight over the deepest cuts. The white fabric turned pink, then red. It was a crude job. It would have to do. I sat at the desk. The chair creaked under my weight. My bandaged hand moved the mouse, the cursor a white arrow on a black screen. I held the USB drive between my thumb and forefinger. This was a mistake. I knew it. This was a door, and I didn't want to see what was on the other side. But the man in the mask, the man in the motel, this had to be from him. Evidence. A taunt. Something I could take to the police. I could give it to them, and they would handle it. It would be over. I just had to look. Just once. The lie was a thin, brittle shield. I pushed the drive into the USB port. The connection was a small, satisfying click. A window popped up on the screen. A single folder. It was named Memories. A wave of nausea rolled through my stomach. It felt hot and acidic. I took a breath. My lungs burned. My hand trembled over the mouse. I opened the folder. Inside, one file. A video file. My eyes locked on the name. Sunset_204. MP4. Sunset. The Sunset Inn. Room 204. The place I had just left. The room where I put a knife in a man's shoulder. The blood in my body went cold. The throb in my hands faded, replaced by an icy numbness that spread up my arms. This wasn't from the masked man. This was from the room. It was waiting for me. He had left it for me. The man in the mirror. My finger twitched. The mouse clicked. The video player opened, a black rectangle that filled the screen. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the image resolved. It was poor quality, grainy, shot in low light. The colors were washed out. The shot was unsteady, shaking with the motion of the person holding the camera. From the speakers, a sound came. Breathing. Heavy, labored breaths that were more like a low growl. The sound of a predator catching a scent. The point of view moved forward. I recognized the cheap carpet. The faded floral pattern of the curtains. It was room 204. The camera panned across the small table, the lamp, the bolted-down television set with its dead screen. It was moving with purpose. A hunter's deliberate pace. Then the camera turned toward the bed. A woman was sitting there, hunched over, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her body was a tight knot of fear. A memory, thin as smoke, brushed against the inside of my skull. A name. Tessa. The name on the map. It was her. Her head was down, her dark hair hiding her face. She was shaking. A small, helpless sound escaped her. "Please," she sobbed, her voice muffled. "You promised." And then a voice came from behind the camera, the voice of the person filming. It was deep. It was steady. It was my voice. But it was not. It was hollowed out, scraped clean of any warmth, any humanity. It was the voice of a thing wearing my throat like a suit. "A promise?" my voice said, a note of cold curiosity in it. "I don't make promises." The camera lurched. It was thrown, or dropped, onto the foot of the bed. The view tilted sideways, showing nothing but the creased, dirty bedspread and a slice of wall. The image was static now. But the audio was not. Tessa screamed. It was not a single sound, but a series of them, sharp and high, and full of a final, terrible understanding. It was the sound of an animal caught in a trap. It was the sound of a life ending. Underneath her screams, another sound began. A laugh. It started low, a chuckle, then it grew. It was a rich, full-throated sound of pure, unrestrained delight. A man enjoying his work. The laugh was mine. The sound of it vibrated through the cheap laptop speakers, a monstrous, joyful noise that filled the space around me. I yelled. A wordless noise of revulsion. My bandaged hand flew out and slammed the laptop screen shut. The black lid snapped down with a crack of plastic. The sounds did not stop. Tessa's screams still echoed. My laugh still rumbled. They weren't coming from the laptop anymore. I stared at the closed machine. The sound was all around me. A scream ripped through the air from the direction of the kitchen. That horrible, happy laugh answered from the dark hallway behind me. The sounds were solid. They had weight. They were in the room with me. In the house. I scrambled back, my chair tipping over and crashing to the floor. I shoved myself away from the desk, crab-walking backward, until my back hit the far wall. I pressed my palms over my ears, the rough gauze abrasive against my skin. It did nothing. The sounds weren't coming from outside. They were coming from the walls themselves. They were seeping out of the plaster. The building was screaming. The floorboards vibrated with the memory of that laugh. The apartment wasn't just a place I lived, it was a container, a vessel, and it was full of what I had done. He had not only stained the motel room, he had stained this place, my home. He had brought the memory back with him and burned it into the very air I breathed. The sounds rose to a crescendo, a final, piercing shriek, a wet, tearing noise, another booming peal of laughter. Then, silence. It fell like a blanket, a thick, heavy absence of sound that was worse than the noise had been. I stayed on the floor, curled against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. My breath came in ragged, shallow gulps. I didn't move for a long time. I just listened to the silence, waiting for it to break again. It didn't. Finally, slowly, I uncurled. I pushed myself to my feet, using the wall for support. My entire body was shaking with a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I looked at the desk, the overturned chair, the closed laptop, and, lying next to it, the map. The crinkled paper lay flat under the light of a small desk lamp. The red X over the Sunset Inn seemed to glow. My eyes followed the thin red line that snaked away from it, across the grid of streets, out of the city, and up into the hills. It came to a stop at a third X, a location marked only by a small, hand-drawn square. A house. Isolated. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had to go there. The fight I'd felt in the bathroom, the rage that had made me shatter the mirror, was gone. It had been burned out of me. All that was left was a cold, quiet resignation. This was a path laid out for me, and I had to walk it to the end. My gaze drifted to the space next to the third X. There was something new there. Words. A note, scrawled in the same looping hand as the message on the mirror. The same unsteady script as the labels on the map. I had looked at this map a dozen times. I had stared at it, memorized it. That note had not been there before. It consisted of 2 words. Come home. The engine was a low drone, a sound that had been a constant for the last hour. I didn't register the turns in the road. My hands, wrapped in stiff, blood-spotted gauze, held the steering wheel. The car climbed. The pines grew thicker, crowding the asphalt, their branches scratching at the sky. A fog hung in the trees, a damp, gray breath. The world outside the windshield was reduced to road, fog, and the dark green of the trees. There was no other traffic. No sign of life. I was not driving. My body was operating the machine, my foot pressing the gas, my hands guiding the wheel, but I was just a passenger. The command from the map, come home, was lodged in my brain. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a wire, threaded through my muscles, pulling me forward. The fight was gone. The video had scoured it out of me. What remained was a hollow space. The road curved sharply. The house was just there. It didn't emerge from the fog. It simply appeared, as if it had been waiting in that exact spot for 1,000,000 years. It was a single-story cabin, made of dark, weathered wood, the color of old blood. A sagging porch ran along the front. The roof was a patchwork of tin and tar. A single stone chimney stood crooked against the gray canvas of the sky. I pulled the car onto a patch of muddy gravel beside the porch. I killed the engine. The drone stopped. The silence that rushed in was heavy, pressing on my eardrums. I could hear the faint drip of water from a tree branch, a sound as sharp as a pinprick. I sat for a long time looking at the house. My hand went to the passenger seat where the knife from the motel room lay, the one I had pulled from the man's shoulder. Its handle was cool and solid in my bandaged palm. A weapon. Against what? The thought flickered and died. I opened the car door. The air was cold. It smelled of wet earth and pine needles. The smell of decay. My feet crunched on the gravel. I walked up the 3 wooden steps to the porch. They groaned under my weight. The front door was dark wood, its paint peeled away in long strips. There was no lock on the knob, just a dark hole where one used to be. I hesitated. My heart hammered a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. I knew what was in the house. I didn't know how I knew. The knowledge was just there, a block of ice in my gut. I had to go in. This was the path. I pushed the door. It swung inward without a sound, opening onto darkness. The air that rolled out was colder than the air outside. It was a dead, still cold. The smell of dust was thick, a dry film that coated the back of my throat. I stood on the threshold, letting my eyes adjust. A long hallway stretched out before me. To the left and right were closed doors. The floor was covered in a uniform layer of gray dust, thick as felt. But not all of it. A path had been cleared. A single distinct trail of footprints leading straight down the hall from the front door. Someone had walked here. Recently. The dust was disturbed, showing the dark floorboards beneath. My mind supplied a name. The man in the mask. The Avenger. He was here. He was waiting. My grip tightened on the knife. I stepped inside, my shoes making no sound on the clean-swept path. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click. I followed the trail. My own breathing was loud in the narrow space. My footsteps were silent. The path led past two closed doors on the left, one on the right. It didn't deviate. It went straight to the end of the hall, to the last door on the right. The door was slightly ajar. A thin sliver of gray light cut through the darkness. This was it. A confrontation. An end. A part of me welcomed it. I pushed the door open. The room was almost bare. It held a single piece of furniture. An iron bed frame, rusted and skeletal, pushed against the far wall. There was no mattress. A single window, its glass filmed with grime, let in the weak afternoon light. The path of clean footprints ended just inside the doorway. I stepped into the room, my eyes scanning the corners, looking for a shadow, a shape, a man. There was nothing. The room was just a room. Behind me, the door moved. I heard the whisper of wood against the frame. It was a slow, deliberate sound. I turned. The door was closing, gliding shut on its own. It settled into the frame, with a final, solid thud. A click echoed in the small room. The sound of a latch engaging. I lunged for it. My bandaged hand closed around the cold brass knob. I twisted. It didn't move. I pulled. The door was solid, immovable. I threw my shoulder against it. The wood didn't give. I hit it again. A grunt of effort torn from my throat. Nothing. It was like pushing against a wall of stone. I was trapped. A surge of heat flooded my body. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide, scanning the room again. It was a box. A cell. My breath came faster, ragged little puffs of white in the cold air. That's when I saw the wall. The wall opposite the bed. The paint was old, a pale yellow that had cracked and flaked over the years. Across its surface someone had carved a message. The cuts were deep, gouged into the plaster with something sharp. They were chaotic, frantic, a mess of overlapping white lines against the yellow. But they formed a word. 4 letters. Run. I stared at it. The word pulsed in the dim light. It wasn't a warning. It was a mockery. Run where? A low thrumming started. It wasn't a sound so much as a feeling. A vibration that began in the floorboards, traveling up through the soles of my shoes and into my bones. The entire house was humming, a deep, resonant note, like a single chord played on a massive cello. I looked at the window. The gray light outside was changing. It bled away, replaced by a deep, ugly red, the color of a blood vessel seen through skin. The light filled the room, painting the walls, the floor, my own hands in a crimson wash. The air shimmered. In the corner of my eye, a shape began to resolve. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow fade, like a photograph developing. An old wooden vanity appeared against the wall, its mirror tarnished and dark. Next to it, a tall wardrobe materialized, its dark wood gleaming in the red light. The rusted bed frame was no longer alone. The room was filling up. A braided rug appeared on the floor at my feet. The stench of dust was gone, replaced by a faint, cloying scent, old perfume. The house was remembering. A sound started. It was quiet at first. A woman's weeping. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was not the shriek from the video. This was a sound of despair, a soft, broken whimpering that scraped along my nerves. It sounded so close. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me. There was nothing. The weeping grew louder, closer. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wardrobe. "Please," a voice sobbed. It was thin, trembling. "Please, no." The name surfaced from the fog in my head, unbidden. Chloe, the second name on the map. My back was pressed against the wall with the clawed-out word. The knife felt small and useless in my hand. I was breathing through my mouth, my lungs burning with the cold, perfumed air. My eyes were fixed on the wardrobe. The weeping was coming from in there. A shadow in the corner of the room detached itself from the other shadows. It wasn't a trick of the red light. It was solidifying. It gathered the darkness to it, pulling the gloom into a single shape. A human shape. Tall. Lean. It took a step forward, out of the corner, into the center of the room. It was not the man in the mask. It was me. Or a version of me. The face was mine, the body was mine, but it was all wrong. The eyes were flat, lifeless pits in a red glow. The mouth was stretched into a smile. The same smile I had seen in the shattered mirror. The same joy I had heard in the laughter on the video. It was the face of the thing that wore my skin. The figure's gaze locked onto mine. The weeping from the wardrobe stopped. In the new silence, the figure raised its hand. It was holding a knife. A simple kitchen knife, its blade catching the red light. It took another step toward me. I tried to move, to run, to scream. My body was frozen. My muscles were locked. My feet were cemented to the floor. All I could do was watch as this other me, this monster wearing my face, walked slowly, deliberately toward me. It moved without a sound. Its feet made no impression on the braided rug. It was a phantom, a memory made solid by the will of the house. It stopped a few feet away. The smile widened. It was a look of pure, unblemished pleasure. It knew me. It knew my fear. It was feeding on it. It raised its knife. The blade pointed at my chest. The red light glinted on the steel. This was the end. He was going to erase me. The thing that I was, the man cowering against the wall, would be gone, and he would be all that was left. My eyes squeezed shut. I braced for the impact, for the sharp, tearing pain. My whole body tensed, a knot of pure animal terror. Nothing happened. There was no pain, no impact. The silence stretched. The low thrumming of the house faded. The scent of perfume vanished. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The red light was gone. The room was lit by the same flat gray light from before. The vanity was gone. The wardrobe was gone. The rug was gone. The room was bare again. Just the rusted iron bed frame and the four walls. I looked at the door. It was wide open. I was alone. My breath came out in a long, shuddering gasp. It had been a vision. A trick. The house playing with me. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out, and landed hard on the floor. My hands were shaking so hard the gauze wrappings rustled. My gaze fell to the floor in front of me, right where the figure had stood, right where it had vanished. Lying on the dusty floorboards was a knife, a kitchen knife, with a cheap wooden handle and a 6-inch blade. It was not a vision. It was real. I could see the grain of the wood, the dull shine of the steel. The blade was dark with something old and crusted, dried blood, flaking off in tiny dark specks. It was the exact knife the apparition had been holding. It had left it behind. A souvenir. A promise. The wood of the floor was hard against my spine. Dust motes danced in the gray light, each one a tiny world of its own. My lungs burned. I drew in a breath and choked on the dry air. My gaze was fixed on the knife. It wasn't an apparition. It was a thing of weight and substance, lying on the boards a few feet away. The handle was a cheap, dark wood. The blade was a dull sliver of steel, marred by dark, flaky patches. My hand, wrapped in its stiff gauze, trembled as I reached for it. The floorboards were rough under my palm. My fingers closed around the handle. It was real. Solid. Cold. The weight of it settled in my hand, a familiar anchor in the chaos. I had to get out. The thought was a single, sharp command cutting through the fog. This house was a trap. A tomb. It had shown me a glimpse of its memory, and that memory wanted me dead. I used the wall to push myself up. My legs were unsteady. The gauze on my hands was dark with grime from the floor. I held the new knife, the kitchen knife, in a white-knuckle grip. It felt more like a part of me than the one I'd taken from the motel. I turned, my eyes on the open doorway of the room. Freedom was just down the hall, just past the closed doors, just through the front door that had swung shut behind me. I took a step, then another. My shoes scraped on the dusty floor, the sound unnaturally loud. I reached the hallway. Darkness pooled at both ends. To my right, the front door. To my left, the rest of the house. I took a step toward the exit. A shape exploded from the darkness on my left. It was a blur of motion, a mass of fury that slammed into me before my brain could process what I was seeing. The impact drove the air from my lungs. My back hit the opposite wall with a jarring thud that rattled my teeth. The knife flew from my grasp, skittering across the floorboards into the shadows. A hand, strong and calloused, clamped around my throat. I was pinned. My head was slammed again against the wall. White spots flared in my vision. I gagged, my fingers scrabbling at the arm that was crushing my windpipe. A face shoved itself into mine. It was the man from the motel. The man with the mask. He wasn't wearing it now. His face was contorted, a mask of pure hatred. His eyes were bloodshot. A crude bandage was wrapped around his shoulder, a dark, wet patch of crimson blooming in its center. My blood. "You came back," he rasped, his voice a low growl of gravel and rage. His breath was hot and sour against my face. "You actually came back to this place, you son of a bitch." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. My hands tore uselessly at his forearm. It was like trying to bend steel. He was fueled by something I couldn't comprehend. "I don't." I managed to force out, the words broken by the pressure on my throat. "Don't what?" he snarled, tightening his grip. I felt the cartilage in my neck grind. "Don't remember? Is that the game you're playing now? The poor, lost man who doesn't know who he is." He shoved me hard against the wall again. My vision swam. I was losing consciousness. He must have seen it, because he suddenly eased the pressure. I slumped, gasping for air, the sound loud and wet in the hallway. He didn't let me go. He just held me there, his body a wall of muscle and hate. "I don't know you," I wheezed, my throat raw. "I don't know what you're talking about." A harsh, bitter laugh escaped his lips. It was a terrible sound. "You don't know?" he repeated, his voice dripping with venom. He leaned in closer, his eyes boring into mine. "You killed my sister. You killed Chloe. In this very house. Don't you tell me you don't know." His free hand shot out and pointed past my head, down the hall toward the front of the cabin, toward a closed door opposite the rooms I had passed. The living room. "Right in there," he hissed. "On the floor. That's where you left her." My eyes followed his trembling, pointing finger. I looked at the closed door. For a fraction of a second, the wood of the door dissolved. It wasn't there anymore. I was looking into the room beyond. The air shimmered, just as it had in the bedroom. I saw a threadbare sofa, an overturned coffee table, and on the floor, a girl. Her hair was splayed out like a dark halo on the dusty floorboards. Her eyes were wide, staring up at the ceiling with an expression of profound shock. Chloe. The name from the map. The name from the weeping in the wardrobe. The image was there, and then gone, the solid wooden door snapping back into place. It wasn't a memory that belonged to me. It felt like a photograph that had been burned onto my retinas. I flinched back, a sound of denial caught in my throat. He saw it. He saw the flicker of recognition in my eyes. "Ah," he whispered, a grim smile touching his lips. "There it is. You remember?" "No," I said, shaking my head. The movement sent a fresh wave of pain through it. That wasn't. I didn't. He wasn't listening. He used his grip on my neck to slam me sideways, pushing me farther down the hall, away from the front door. I stumbled, my feet tangling. He was impossibly strong, his rage giving him a power that my own depleted body couldn't match. He pinned me against the wall again, near the bedroom I had just escaped. "My purpose isn't to kill you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. His face was inches from mine. I could see every line of exhaustion and grief etched into his skin. That would be too easy. A gift. "No, I want you to remember. I want you to feel every second of what you did. I want you to live with it, just like I have. I hunted you for months. After the accident, you just disappeared, became a ghost. But I knew you'd come back here. A creature like you always returns to its den." He released my throat, and in the same motion his hand went to the small of his back. He pulled out a handgun. It was a compact, semi-automatic, black and unforgiving. The metallic click as he thumbed off the safety was the loudest sound I had ever heard. My whole body froze. This was it. But he didn't point it at my head. He didn't aim for my chest. He lowered the barrel, aiming it directly at my right knee. "I'm going to make sure you can never run away again," he said, his voice cold and steady. "Not from me. Not from this house. Not from what's inside your own head." My eyes were locked on the dark, circular void of the muzzle. It was an inch from my kneecap. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the tremors of his fury. My mind was a blank slate of terror. There was no escape. No way out. A cell in the woods. A vision of my own death. And now this. A man with a gun who wanted to shatter my bones, to cripple me and leave me here with the things this house remembered. Desperation clawed at me. It was a physical thing, a frantic animal trapped in my chest, tearing at my ribs. I was going to die. Or worse, I was going to be broken and left in this abyss. And then, something shifted. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a chemical change. The searing heat of fear just vanished. It was doused, extinguished, as if a switch had been flipped. In its place, a profound cold spread through my limbs. The trembling stopped. My breathing, which had been ragged and panicked, became slow and even. The world sharpened. The grain of the wood in the wall behind me. The faint smell of gun oil. The way the man's knuckles were white as he gripped the gun. I was no longer the man pinned to the wall. That man was gone. My body moved. It lunged forward, not away from the gun, but into it. A gasp of surprise escaped the Avenger's lips. It was a move he never anticipated. He was expecting me to beg, to plead, to try and twist away. He wasn't expecting an attack. My body slammed into his. My shoulder drove into his chest. My hand, the one with the dirty gauze, shot out and clamped down on his wrist, the one holding the gun. His finger was already tightening on the trigger. A deafening roar filled the hallway. The explosion was inches from my ear. I felt the heat of the muzzle flash on my cheek. The bullet, meant for my knee, went wild. It tore a chunk of plaster and wood from the wall beside my head, showering us with debris. The ringing in my ears was a solid, physical tone. His surprise became a surge of adrenaline-fueled rage. He tried to bring the gun to bear again, to wrestle it free, but the strength that had pinned me moments before was gone. Or rather, my own strength had magnified tenfold. My grip on his wrist was an iron vice. I applied pressure. A wet, popping sound echoed in the hall, obscene and final. It was the sound of his wrist breaking. A shriek of pure agony was torn from his throat. The gun clattered to the floor. He was still reeling from the pain when my other hand found the knife. The kitchen knife he had knocked from my grasp. I didn't remember seeing where it fell. My body just knew. It was there, in the shadows by the baseboard. My fingers closed around the handle. He saw the knife in my hand. The hatred in his eyes was washed away by a wave of something new. Shock. Disbelief. And a dawning, bottomless dread. He recognized this. He had seen this before. The struggle was over before it truly began. I didn't give him time to scream again. I didn't give him time to process the shift. I drove the knife forward, a single, efficient, upward thrust under his ribcage. It went in, to the hilt. There was almost no resistance. It was like pushing a blade through canvas. A hot, wet gush spilled over my hand. He made a sound. A choked, gurgling sigh. His body went limp against me. All the fight, all the fire, all the hatred drained out of him, spilling onto the floorboards with his blood. I held him up for a moment, feeling the last, shuddering tremors of his life pass through him. Then I let him go. He slid down the wall, leaving a thick, dark smear, and collapsed in a heap at my feet. His eyes were still open. They were looking at me, not with hate, but with a kind of stupefied awe. A final, horrid understanding. His lips moved, forming words without sound at first. Then, a faint, wet whisper. It's you, he breathed, a bubble of blood forming at the corner of his mouth. You're really back. His eyes glazed over. The last breath rattled in his chest, and then he was just a pile of cooling meat on the floor. I stood over him. The knife was still in my hand, dripping. My shirt was soaked with his blood. The ringing in my ears slowly subsided. I looked at the body, at the ruined wrist, at the dark, spreading pool on the floor. I felt nothing. No fear, no panic, no regret. There was only a quiet, clean-edged feeling of resolution. A problem had been dealt with. A loose end had been tied. And then, for the first time, a voice spoke in my head. It wasn't the fog of confusion. It wasn't the echo of a memory. It was a thought as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. It was my own voice, but it wasn't. It was steady, confident, pleased. "Thank you," it said. "You cleaned up for me." My hand was steady. The knife was an extension of my arm. The blood, his blood, dripped from the tip of the blade, a slow, thick teardrop that landed silently on the floorboards. Below me, the man's final rattling breath had faded. His open eyes stared at the ceiling. They saw nothing. I looked at him, at the dark stain blooming on his shirt, at the ruin I had made of his wrist. I registered the facts of it. A body. A weapon. A consequence. The fear I had been drowning in just moments ago was a distant memory. A story that happened to someone else. The ringing in my ears had been replaced by a deep, resonant quiet. "You cleaned up for me." The voice was not a sound. It was a thought placed directly into the center of my mind. It was my voice, but colder. Clearer. It held an authority my own frantic thoughts had never possessed. I tried to speak, to form a question in my raw throat. "Who are you?" The question was a weak flicker, a dying ember in the cold furnace of my skull. My lips did not move. My jaw remained locked. "I am you," the voice answered, amused. "The original, the one you tried to get rid of." My body was a statue. I was the ghost inside the machine, screaming at the controls, but the controls did not respond. I wanted to drop the knife. I wanted to run, to scramble out the door and never look back. I wanted to vomit. But my arm remained by my side, the knife held in a firm, professional grip. My legs were planted on the floor, solid as a foundation. I was a passenger. That car wreck wasn't an accident. The voice continued, its tone informational, like a professor explaining a simple theorem. "It was you." The weak part. The part that grew a conscience and couldn't live with it. "You tried to kill us both." A final, desperate act of cowardice. "But you're not very good at that, are you? All you managed to do was lock me in a cage in the back of your head and create this blank, pathetic thing that has been wandering around asking questions." My hand, my own hand, moved with a purpose that was not mine. It brought the flat of the blade against my shirt. The fabric, already dark with my own dried blood and the man's fresh offering, dragged against the steel. Back and forth. A deliberate, methodical motion. Wiping it clean. The image was so casual, so horrifyingly mundane, that a fresh wave of silent screaming ripped through my consciousness. I was watching a stranger. A monster in my own skin. My fingers, wrapped in their crude gauze, then began to unwrap the knife I had taken from the motel, the one tucked into my waistband. Its handle was taped. My body carefully placed the bloody kitchen knife on the floor, its job done, and took up the other one. It felt balanced. "Right. But you left me a gift," the voice said, a thread of satisfaction woven into it. "Before you slammed the door shut, I made something. A breadcrumb trail. A way back. You thought you found that map. You fool." My body turned. It pivoted on the ball of its foot, a smooth economic movement that felt utterly alien. It did not look at the dead man on the floor again. He was irrelevant now. Old news. My foot lifted and stepped over his outstretched leg. I felt the brush of my jeans against his cooling flesh. The sensation was nothing. It was like stepping over a log. "I made the map for you. For this new you." A pilgrimage. Each point on that map was a memory, a source of power. A sin. I needed you to walk the path, to visit the shrines. I needed you to feel the fear. I needed you to face the consequences. Every step you took, every little piece of the puzzle you thought you were solving, was just you, picking the lock on my cage. You led me home. You did very well. My hand reached for the front doorknob. The metal was cool. The door swung open with a low groan, revealing the deep, starless dark of the woods outside. A breeze, smelling of damp earth and pine needles, washed over my face. For a moment it was freedom. For a moment my own will surged, a desperate desire to bolt. Run. Now. Just run. but the body simply walked onto the porch. Its steps were measured, unhurried. It walked down the 3 wooden steps, and my shoes crunched on the gravel of the driveway. It did not head for the road. It turned, moving along the side of the house, into the deeper darkness beneath the trees. Branches, thin and skeletal, scraped against my shoulders and arms. I flinched internally, but the body did not react. It knew where it was going. The map. The final mark. X5. The one behind the house. It was not a long walk. The trees thinned out behind the cabin, opening into a small, natural clearing. In the center stood an ancient oak, its branches thick and gnarled, reaching up like arthritic arms into the black sky. And at its base, there was a hole. It was a perfect rectangle cut into the earth. A grave. A mound of dark, freshly dug soil was piled neatly beside it. The body stopped at the edge. I was looking down into a pit of blackness. The smell of raw dirt was strong. What is this? The question was a whimper in my mind. The last gasp of a drowning man. What is this place? Jitgraw Duras. The voice in my head didn't sound like a voice anymore. It was a roar. A flood. This is where you belong. The dam broke. It was not a memory. It was an experience. It was every terrible second of the life I had tried to erase, crashing down on my fragile empty consciousness all at once. A face in a car window, mouth open in a scream that I couldn't hear through the glass, just before the impact. The heavy, greasy weight of a tire iron in my hand. The satisfying thud as it connected with something soft. The sickeningly wet snap of a bone. The man from the motel, not as he was now, but younger. His face frozen in disbelief as he saw what I had done to his sister. Chloe. Not the weeping sound from a wardrobe, but a sharp, terrified intake of breath in a room that smelled of dust and decay. The cold, cheap linoleum of a gas station restroom floor against a man's cheek. The glint of a cheap silver locket as it fell from a grasping hand. A man begging in a language I didn't understand, his words wet with tears and blood. The feel of soft earth under my fingernails as I dug. And dug. And dug. The sheer, undiluted brutality of it all. The rage. The pleasure. The cold, clean satisfaction of an act completed. It was a torrent of violence and depravity that my constructed self, the lost man in the motel, could not possibly withstand. It was an ocean of filth pouring into a teacup. My mind shattered. The I who had woken up with amnesia, who had followed the map, who had been pinned against the wall in terror, that I, was torn apart, shredded, dissolved into the overwhelming onslaught. I felt myself disintegrating, the threads of my short, confused existence coming undone. There was a final, silent shriek of non-existence, and then, nothing. The war was over. The body by the edge of the pit stood motionless for a long time. The tension in the shoulders eased. The frantic, hunted posture of the last few days melted away, replaced by something else. Something solid. The head, which had been hung in confusion and fear, lifted. It scanned the clearing, the dark trees, the silent cabin. The eyes were no longer wide with shock, they were narrow. Appraising. A small, slow smile touched the lips. It was not a smile of happiness. It was a smile of ownership, of supreme confidence. He looked down into the dark, rectangular hole in the earth. He looked at it for a moment, as if paying his respects at a gravesite. The grave of the weak, scared man who had just ceased to exist. He raised a hand, the one holding the taped knife, and touched his own chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. His heart. His lips parted, and for the first time, he spoke aloud. The voice that came out was not the strained, wheezing voice of the victim. It was deep, level, and filled with a resonant power. Rest in peace. The air was thin and cold, carrying the sharp scent of pine and disturbed earth. I turned from the rectangular hole, leaving the words I spoke to hang in the pre-dawn gloom. They were benediction. A closing statement. The soft dirt and leaf litter crunched under my boots as I walked away, each step measured and firm. There was no hurry. The frantic, stumbling flight of the man who used to live here was gone. My legs were my own. My muscles responded to commands with a clean efficiency he had never known. Branches that had scraped and clawed at him moments before now merely brushed against my shoulders as I passed. I moved through the trees not as an intruder but as a landlord inspecting his property. The cabin emerged from the shadows, a solid, dark shape against the lightning sky. The front porch boards did not creak under my weight. I did not look back. The body inside was a piece of yesterday's business, a loose end, tied. The cleanup was complete. My car sat where he'd left it, angled awkwardly off the dirt track. I opened the driver's side door. The sound of the latch was a loud metallic snap in the quiet woods. I slid behind the wheel. My hands, still wrapped in their stained gauze, felt steady on the cold plastic. The feel of the fabric was a reminder, a trophy. On the passenger seat lay the map. The old, brittle square of human skin. The ink was dark brown now, the fresh blood of the man in the cabin having dried completely. Its work was done. A useful tool. An elegant solution to a complex problem. I picked it up, ran my thumb over the coarse texture, then folded it once and slid it into the glove compartment. The click of the compartment door shutting was a full stop. My fingers found the keys in the ignition. He had left them there in his panic. A final, thoughtless convenience. I turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, the sound and unwelcome violence in the virgin morning. I did not flinch. I put the car in reverse, my eyes on the mirrors, and eased back onto the track. I did not spare the cabin a final glance. It held no interest for me anymore. It was just a place, a marker on a finished map. The drive back toward the city was smooth. My hands held the wheel at 10 and 2, a comfortable, practiced grip. The rising sun bled orange and pink into the horizon, casting long shadows from the trees that lined the highway. I watched the road, the other cars, the signs. My mind was not a vortex of fear. It was clear, a calm surface reflecting the world as it passed by. The constant, low-grade hum of terror that had been his companion was gone. In its place was a quiet, potent awareness. I was not being hunted. I was commuting. I pulled off the highway at an exit marked with the familiar logos of fast food and cheap gas. The 24-hour convenience store buzzed under fluorescent lights. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. A young man behind the counter, no older than 20, looked up from his phone with an expression of profound boredom. He did not meet my eyes. I walked down an aisle, the worn linoleum sticking slightly to the soles of my boots. I picked up a newspaper from a wire rack and went to the coffee station. The smell of burnt, cheap coffee filled the air. I took a large styrofoam cup and filled it with black coffee. No sugar, no cream. At the counter, I placed the paper and the coffee down. The cashier scanned the paper's barcode with a beep. "Anything else for you?" he asked, his voice flat. "No," I said. The sound of my own voice was different, deeper, more level than the strained whisper he had used. I paid with the crumpled bills from my pocket, the last of his money. As the cashier counted out the change, my eyes fell on the newspaper in my hand. It was folded to an inner page. A small article, near the bottom, with a grainy photo of a smiling girl. The headline was simple: "Police still searching in disappearance of local woman." I read the first few lines. Chloe. Her name was Chloe. They mentioned the abandoned car, the last place she was seen. A gas station restroom off Route 9. I felt the corners of my lips twitch. A small, internal muscle movement that was over as soon as it began. I took my change and my coffee and walked out. The bell chimed my exit. The apartment was exactly as he had left it. A disaster zone. Clothes were strewn across the floor. An overturned chair lay on its side. The remains of a cheap meal were hardening on a plate on the small table. It was the nest of a frightened animal. I walked through the chaos, my boots leaving clean prints in the dust. The air was stale with his sweat and anxiety. I breathed it in. It was the scent of victory. I did not begin to clean. The mess was a monument, evidence of a battle won. I walked to the wall where the mirror used to be. The wall was a spiderweb of cracks in the drywall around a gaping hole. He had done that. A pointless, flailing gesture of protest. On the floor, among the gypsum dust and debris, lay a large shard of glass. I nudged it with the toe of my boot, flipping it over so the reflective side faced up. I looked down. He saw a haggard man, eyes wide with a permanent shock, shoulders hunched in a perpetual cringe. He saw a victim. I saw something else. My reflection was fragmented, bisected by a long crack in the glass, but it was clear enough. The jaw was set. The eyes, which had been darting and unfocused, were now still. They held no fear. They held no confusion. They held a cold, calm purpose. They were the eyes of a craftsman looking at his tools. My head was no longer hung low. It was level. My posture was straight, solid. This was not the face of a man running from monsters. It was the face of the monster itself, finally at peace in its own skin. I stared at the reflection for a long time, reacquainting myself with the man I was, the man I had always been. After a while, I turned away from the broken glass and walked into the small kitchen. The faucet dripped with a slow, rhythmic plink into a sink full of dirty dishes. I ignored them. I opened a drawer beside the stove, my fingers pushing past a jumble of takeout menus and rubber bands. At the back of the drawer, underneath a stack of old utility bills, was my prize. A fresh, folded sheet of heavy paper. It was a topographical map of the city and the surrounding counties, clean and unmarked. I carried it back to the small table, pushing the plate of old food aside with the back of my hand. It fell to the floor with a clatter. I sat down in the one remaining chair, the same chair he had sat in, trembling as he'd first studied the map made of skin. I unfolded the new map. The paper was crisp. The grid lines and contour lines were precise. It was a blank slate, a new world of possibilities. From the same drawer, I retrieved a small bottle of artist's ink and a calligraphy pen. The ink was a deep, rich crimson. I unscrewed the cap, the plastic grooves squeaking softly. I dipped the sharp metal nib of the pen into the bottle. A perfect, heavy drop of red clung to the tip. My hand was steady. I moved the pen over the pristine paper. My movements were not hesitant or uncertain. I was not discovering a path. I was dictating one. I drew a line following a major highway leading out of the city to the north. Then a branching line, a smaller state road. Then another, a thin, winding line that led deep into a wooded area. The process was calm, methodical, an act of pure creation. This was my work, my art. He thought he was solving a puzzle. The poor fool. He never understood. You don't solve the maze, you build it. I finished the route. At the end of the final, winding road, next to a small blue marking for a creek, I pressed the nib of the pen into the paper. A single, sharp, red X. The first point of interest for a new pilgrimage. A new shrine. I set the pen down, capping the ink bottle. My work here, for now, was done. My hand went to my pocket and I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, illuminating my face in the dim light of the apartment. My thumb, the gauze on it now dirty and dark, swiped the screen open. I went to my contacts. It was a long list. Names and numbers. So many possibilities. My thumb scrolled down, past acquaintances, past business contacts, past names that meant nothing. It slowed, then stopped. The name on the screen was Jessica. My thumb moved with deliberate intent. It hovered over the green icon next to her name. Then it pressed down. The call connected. On the other end of the line, a phone began to ring.